Canada didn't fire a shot. But they just did something far more dangerous to the United States. They passed a law. And in less than 2 months, over $40 billion worth of U.S. food exports from grains and meat to dairy and produce has vanished without warning. New Canadian regulations are turning away American crops, rejecting meat, and tearing up contracts. But the scariest part, dozens of U.S. states are now on the brink. When food can't be exported, farmers go bankrupt. Processing plants shut down, and everyday Americans, people like us, pay the price with more expensive meals, fewer jobs, and small towns slowly fading away. Where do you live? If you're in one of the 5 states we're about to reveal, watch this video to the end because your hometown may be hit hardest by Canada's latest move. Tap subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the insights the mainstream media won't talk about. Wisconsin. Wisconsin has long been known as America's dairyland. No place comes close to matching its scale of milk, cheese, and dairy production. Each year, Wisconsin exports billions of dollars worth of dairy, and Canada used to be one of its largest markets. But everything changed in an instant when Canada passed the Milk Origin Verification Act, a regulation requiring all dairy imports to prove their supply chains are eco-certified, hormone-free, and GMO traceable. On paper, that sounds reasonable. But for Wisconsin farmers, it's a death sentence disguised in cold bureaucratic terms. As soon as the law went into effect, cheese shipments were seized at the border. Contracts for pasteurized milk were abruptly canceled. Small dairy businesses across Green Bay, Madison, and lakeside communities are now in crisis. For many Americans far from farm life, Canada not buying milk might sound like small news. But if you've ever stepped foot on a Wisconsin dairy farm, you'd understand that's the lifeline. Dairy isn't like durable goods, you can't store it indefinitely. When Canada stops accepting milk, it's not just lost revenue, it disrupts the entire production cycle. Cows don't pause their milk production because of trade policy. Farmers can't stop paying for feed insurance or labor. But when the primary market vanishes, the entire chain collapses. In Dane County, dairy processing plants have started canceling night shifts. In La Crosse, a cheese packing facility laid off over 100 workers in 3 weeks. Some larger cooperatives have announced plans to shrink their operations because they no longer have a stable market. And the bitterest truth, no one warned them. There were no emergency briefings, no federal alert, just mounting invoices, milk trucks turned away, and silence from a partner that used to be close. But this isn't just a trade issue, it's about identity. Wisconsin isn't like states that can pivot to technology, tourism, or services. This is a place where manual labor, hard work, and family legacy are its bedrock. A dairy farm isn't just a business, it's a home, a heritage passed down through generations. And now those values are being eroded not by weather, but by a trade regulation from a former trusted ally. Not everyone in Wisconsin exports milk, but nearly everyone knows a farmer has eaten local cheese or attended a county dairy festival. So when the dairy industry trembles, a community loses a piece of its soul. We must ask, why is a Canadian law affecting us so deeply? Because the US and Wisconsin in particular depended too heavily on exports without backup plans. When economic strategies assume friends will always stay friends, even a small policy shift can bring down the whole system. If this pattern continues, if Canada and other partners keep raising new technical barriers, American farmers won't just lose income, they'll lose their voice. And here's the painful irony. Urban consumers in Chicago, Boston, and New York are now facing rising milk prices. They don't know why, but the reason is simple. If goods can't be exported, it doesn't mean they become cheaper. It means domestic markets become disrupted. Economists in Milwaukee warn if there's no intervention, Wisconsin could lose up to 25% of its dairy value within 12 months. And when that happens, it's not just farms facing bankruptcy. It's towns, abandoned schools, underfunded, and children losing faith in farming as a future. So what should Wisconsin do? What can people here expect from Washington? At minimum, a voice, because if no one speaks up, negotiates, or defends this critical supply chain, Wisconsin, once a symbol of America's food foundation, will become a symbol of being left behind. And if that happens, the fault won't lie with Canada, but with the United States itself for not hearing the silent cries of those who feed us. California. If Wisconsin is America's dairy heart, California is its diverse pantry, supplying nearly half of the country's fruits, vegetables, and almonds. But what goes unnoticed is that California doesn't just grow for the US, it grows for the world. Among its top export destinations, Canada has always been in the top 3. From raisins and citrus to salad greens and broccoli, thousands of containers of fresh produce roll every week from the Central Valley to Vancouver, Toronto, and Calgary. That all changed when Canada built a paper wall. Under its new Fresh Import Verification Act, every shipment of fresh produce must now meet inspection standards twice as strict as before, covering water source pesticide residue, even harvest date. On the surface, it's consumer protection. But for California farmers, many of whom rent water rights just to survive, it's a death sentence in fine print. Within the first 3 weeks of the law, dozens of containers of citrus and vegetables were returned at the Port of Vancouver. That didn't just cost millions in contracts, it disrupted supply chains already fragile after the pandemic. In packing facilities across Modesto, Salinas, and Bakersfield, the problem is spreading harvest comes in, but there's nowhere to send it. And if you harvest but nobody buys, that's a double loss. You've lost labor time and still have to pay for disposal costs. California is losing more than just a market, it's losing faith. In emergency cooperative meetings, discussions have shifted from temporary fixes to survival plans for the year ahead. Some major producers in the San Joaquin Valley have already announced a 30% reduction in planting next season because they don't know if they'll have buyers. And it's not just the farmers who suffer. California has the largest agricultural workforce in the US. Hundreds of thousands of seasonal workers, many of whom are Latinx. When Canada closes off the production pipeline fractures and the first people to lose their jobs are these workers. A nonprofit in Visalia reported that requests for food assistance jumped 18% last month. Why? Because one man said, "My husband isn't picking grapes anymore." Our packing plant said the shipment was rejected and they didn't hire him back. When plates stop leaving, many plates stop being filled. So why now? Why did Canada pick this moment? Some experts suggest it's a retaliatory move, a response to new US tariffs on Canadian lumber, dairy, and energy. But for California farmers, geopolitics don't matter. What matters is the second largest market has turned its back with no voice for our producers. Consider the Port of Long Beach one of the state's largest fresh produce ports. Every week, hundreds of containers of fresh fruit and vegetables leave for Canada. Now nearly 1 in 5 of them are held for additional inspection. For fresh produce, each day delayed equal sign loss value. One company lost nearly $1 million in a month because of rejected shipments. And don't think consumers are unaffected. When an export market collapses, excess product floods the domestic system. That can push prices down initially, but long-term it destroys supply chains. Farmers go bankrupt, workers lose jobs, farmland goes idle, and eventually we begin importing from elsewhere. Then Americans lose control over what's on their plates. California represents modern farming, blending technology, sustainability, and scale. But without government action to stabilize the market, too many people will be forced off the land. And that loss isn't just measurable in dollars. If you've ever eaten strawberries from Watsonville, grapes from Napa, or almonds from Sacramento, you're watching your food system's future be threatened not by a drought, but by administrative policy from another nation. And if we don't step in to protect our growers, we can't protect our own food. So here's the question for viewers. What will you do when your dinner is dictated by someone else? Drop your thoughts below and stay tuned to see the next state Canada has hit, Georgia. To most people, Georgia is known for its sunshine, peaches, peanuts, and endless farmlands. But few realize that Georgia is also one of the largest food exporting states in the southeastern US, especially in poultry and fresh produce. Just the chicken industry alone brings in hundreds of millions of dollars in exports annually, most of it headed to Canada. Then came the import sanitation ban, and everything changed. Canada didn't impose tariffs. It didn't announce sanctions. It simply modified a few lines in its food sanitation standards. But those lines were enough to get dozens of containers of Georgia's frozen chicken turned back at the Port of Halifax for failing to meet the new criteria. This wasn't just a loss for exporters, it triggered a chain reaction. Workers in slaughterhouses, packaging plants, and trucking companies started losing shifts, getting furloughed, and facing pay cuts. If you've ever driven through Gainesville, home to dozens of 24/7 poultry processing plants, you'd notice it with your own eyes, fewer trucks reduced shifts, and some plants closing overnight just to save power. The damage didn't come from a storm. It came from a few keystrokes in Canada's parliament. But it's not just about chicken. Peanuts, Georgia's top-yielding crop, are also feeling the blow. Canada now demands full traceability of every shipment right down to the exact pesticide used. For small farms, that's an impossible burden. Many have dropped their export plans entirely and settled for loss-making domestic sales. The result? Falling prices for growers, shrinking profits, and growing confusion among U.S. consumers. Why are our world-class products now being rejected? It's more than lost exports, it's lost confidence. Georgia once believed it was a vital part of North America's food supply chain. Today it's been reduced to a backup option in case Canada can't find other sources. While Canadian supermarkets now turn to chicken from Brazil and peanuts from Argentina, Georgia watches its containers sit idle. No buildings are being burned, no protests in the streets. But the collapse is real, unfolding quietly inside cold chains, packing lines, and shrinking utility bills. And the damage doesn't stop at the factory gate. It spreads into grocery stores, schools, and households across rural Georgia, communities that have relied on food production for generations. In towns like Albany, Thomasville, and Moultrie, century-old farming hubs, small grocers now order less. One diner owner put it simply, chicken costs 18% more this week, but fewer customers are walking in. Every little cost adds up, and for working families, even a few dollars difference means choosing between a full meal or a full gas tank. Meanwhile, rural public schools heavily reliant on ag tax revenue have begun cutting student lunch programs. A principal in Tift County explained, "When the farmers struggle, the whole community feels it. This isn't just about lunch, it's about the creeping sense that we're being written out of this economy." So what's really happening in Canada isn't just tightening imports, it's redrawing North America's agricultural balance. With new trade pacts in Europe and surging domestic ag investments, Canada is weaning itself off U.S. food, especially politically risky products. Georgia, despite its quality and legacy, wasn't spared. If this trend continues, America won't just lose export markets, it will lose its global leadership in food supply, a role that helped this country weather countless economic crises. When food can't move abroad, it floods the local market. Growers get squeezed. Processors lose contracts. And consumers, that's you watching this video, face fewer choices on the plate at higher prices. If you live in Georgia, have you heard anyone say, "It'll all work out"? The real question is, work out how plants are closing, exports are shrinking, and the federal government has yet to offer a single solution to reopen trade channels. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Because Georgia isn't just peaches and peanuts. It feeds millions at home and abroad. And if this land goes silent, we'll all be eating in silence too. Washington. If any regulation strikes at the pinnacle of the food supply chain, it's Canada's newly passed Federal Label Compliance Act. On the surface, it's just a rule about export food label standards. But for Washington, the nation's leader in premium fruit, wine, and seafood exports, it's a silent chokehold. Here's how I see it. Laws like the Federal Label Compliance Act don't make noise. They don't spark trucks being stopped at the border. Instead, they introduce a barrage of new paperwork, barcodes, print-size specs, minutes-old updates that small businesses can't meet overnight. And what happens next? Shipments aren't rejected publicly, they're quietly not approved. That's exactly what's happening now in Wenatchee, Yakima, and Spokane, where apples, pears, and cherries, once destined for Canada, are now piling up in cold storage because they don't meet Canada's new label rules. Sounds unbelievable, right? All because a Packed in the USA label didn't meet Canada's new font size requirement. Hundreds of tons of Washington produce missed their window. The delay didn't just hold up payments, it choked the entire logistics chain. Cold storage freight trucks, containers, packing line workers, everyone was left waiting. And when produce is forced to wait, there's more than revenue lost, it's freshness, quality, and premium pricing too. In Washington, agriculture time is money. One extra day in the cooler can eat up 7–10% of a product's value. It's even worse for mushrooms, berries, or salmon products with half-lives measured in hours. Let me ask Washington viewers directly. When was the last time you ate a cherry picked right from a local orchard? Or have we grown used to fruit from Chile, Mexico, or even Canada, because we can no longer get our own to market? Produce isn't the only thing being blocked by Canada's law. Washington is also home to some of America's best wines from Walla Walla to the Columbia Valley. Canadian gourmet restaurants and wine shops in Toronto and Vancouver once paid 2–3 times U.S. retail prices for these bottles. Under the new law, Canada now requires every alcohol product to include a French-language front label, not just a translation, but requiring approval by a Canadian federal agency. The result, shipments are being returned or stuck awaiting paperwork. Many boutique wineries lacking legal teams have had to stop exporting to Canada, even though it once made up nearly 20% of their annual revenue. If you think this doesn't affect anyone but the winemaker, you're wrong. A bottle that doesn't leave eliminates work for label printers, freight companies, truck drivers, sales reps, and restaurant staff. Everyone along the chain feels it in their paycheck. The heartbreaking part: the people making real products, real value, they're being pushed out of international trade. And it's not their fault. It's the law crafted miles away, but impacting what we eat, how we work, and what we believe here at home. Washington has always taken pride in its connection to Canada. Our products were embraced on both sides of the border. Now that is changing. There's no drama, no fanfare, just a quiet rewind of contracts, canceled shipments, and full refrigeration warehouses. How I see it: if laws like this continue unchecked with no federal response, Washington, renowned for its high-end farm products, will be pushed out of the global market. And then the question won't be, how much can we export, but can our family farms even survive? Because trade isn't just numbers, it's family dinners, tuition checks, retirement plans. If Washington is removed from the export map through regulatory changes, the loss isn't only financial, it's a generational legacy eroded. North Carolina, are you certain the chicken on your dinner plate or the strawberries in your cart will still be there next month? It sounds like an unlikely question, but it's one many North Carolinians are asking themselves now. Just weeks after Canada rolled out new import rules like the Import Sanitation Ban and Fresh Produce Traceability Act, farms, processing plants, and packing facilities here have slipped into a kind of slow-motion shutdown. North Carolina isn't California or Iowa in the export league, yet it plays a unique role as a top producer of industrial chicken-cured tobacco and strawberries products Canada once imported by the hundreds of millions. And now, all three have been swept by new restrictions. Chicken producers now face tighter requirements on sanitation traceability and slaughtering condition standards that many small operations simply can't meet overnight. Strawberry cooperatives must install electronic tracking for every box, a cost that may run into thousands. And Canada has barred tobacco imports unless labels meet bilingual health warnings set by Health Canada. What's the outcome? Shipments rejected, contracts frozen, and worst of all, jobs lost. In Duplin County, home to one of the nation's densest concentrations of chicken farms, processing plants have already cut shifts. A major facility near Clinton just laid off 120 workers, blaming a nearly frozen Canadian export market. Not because the product failed quality inspections, but because foreign regulations are squeezing out local livelihoods. Drive through Goldsboro, Mount Olive, or Asheboro, and you'll notice empty lots where trucks used to line up in the morning. In these towns, food processing isn't just an industry, it's the economic lifeblood parents work in. Plants, schools are funded by those jobs, shops, and diners rely on stable payrolls. And now that foundation is cracking. Residents here aren't just worried about lost orders. They're worried because no one is telling them what comes next. There's no federal rescue plan, no emergency policy, no trade renegotiation in sight. Meanwhile, Canadian grocers who once bought North Carolina produce are turning to Mexico, Brazil, or Canadian growers to fill pipelines. North Carolina proves a critical truth: you don't have to be a top exporter to feel a trade shock. Sometimes just being in the middle of the line makes you vulnerable when trade doors quietly close. If Canada tightens or even closes that pipeline, and the US stays still, what crumbles won't just be exports, it'll be trust in local agriculture. In Rowan County, a strawberry packer supplying 60% of Canada-bound produce had to lay off nearly half its staff after its prime shipment was rejected. Nobody failed, they just couldn't meet a shifting standard in time. And it's the small farms, the workers, the communities that pay the price. North Carolina has always been a hybrid economy, a mix of southern industry and deep agricultural roots. People here work hard. They're tied to land and factories. They believed in the stability of long-term trade relationships. Now those ties are being tested not by the US, but by Canada rewriting the rules. From where I stand, the real danger isn't the export freeze, it's that there's no backup. When Canada shuts the door, locals are left asking, should we wait or step away? Food doesn't wait. Strawberries rot. Chickens hit processing age. You can't freeze those cycles because the border policy changed. And in those voids, families crumble, small businesses suffer, communities feel the strain. So where's the US government with Canadian restrictions in place and plants closing, workers laid off? Washington's response has been about assessing the situation. But real lives are being uprooted cars, sold homes, abandoned generations leaving their roots for survival. If you live in North Carolina, you can feel it: fewer trucks, fewer businesses open, quieter social media channels, schools missing sponsorship. These aren't headlines, they're the signs of a macro shift hitting real neighborhoods. If there's no strategic U.S. response policy fixes media attention, local support, North Carolina risks losing what made it unique: a seamless blend of modern ag and industrial production. And once that foundation rips, rebuilding isn't about money. It's about restoring a generation's trust in the land, the plants, the hills they once called home. North Carolina doesn't need bailouts. It needs to be seen and acted upon before it's too late. Canada didn't need to attack, it only had to sign a pen. And through those quiet stamps, the U.S. lost $40 billion. Millions of food export orders and daily meals once taken for granted. Even worse, we're losing control. If this trend continues, it won't just be about losing exports. It will trigger a domino effect, eroding trust in America's agricultural self-reliance. And what about you? Are you living in a state being affected yet unaware? This video does not promote division or secession. Everything presented is intended to explore, analyze, and spark a conversation based on current facts, emotions, and social trends. We respect the U.S. Constitution and all federal laws. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next episodes, where we spotlight stories often overlooked by mainstream media.